Hi there, my name's Lisa Oliver, and welcome to another reading by the author. Today we're going to be, or rather I'm going to be reading the prologue and chapter 1 from Get Off My Case, which is book 1 of the Stockton Wolves series. That series is now complete with 6 books, I believe it is, so you'll find the links to find that below. But in the meantime, let's get started. Don't forget, all the work that I am reading here, I have full copyright for. If you want to use it for anything in particular, please get in touch with me first. Prologue, 8 years ago. Shane was running as fast as he could, the sound of his pursuer's feet ringing in his ears. He was sweating bullets. His heart was pounding and his lungs felt as though they were going to burst right out of his ribcage, but he couldn't stop. He knew that if he could get through the school's cafeteria, he'd be safe, at least from a physical beating. Sure, the taunts and the name-calling would still continue, and he probably would be humiliated in front of the entire school, but he wouldn't be touched. All he had to do was duck down the alleyway, coming up, run about another 100 metres or so after that, and the cafeteria building would be in sight. Shane ran faster. As soon as he turned into the alley, he realised his mistake. There, leaning against the wall, was his biggest nemesis, Dimitri Polst. Tall, dark, and too fucking good-looking for his own good, he had been tormenting Shane for as long as Shane could remember. Shane had heard that Dimitri had gone for his first shift on the last full moon, so had actually thought the male had left school already. Seemed Shane couldn't be so lucky, especially as he saw the narrow glare of the pure hatred in the other shifter's eyes. "There you are, pretty boy," Dimitri smiled. "I hoped I'd get one more crack at you before I left." Shane skidded to a halt and looked behind him. 3 of Dimitri's friends, humans but big jocks all the same, were blocking the entrance to the alley. The only way out for Shane was past Dimitri. If Shane had shifted before, he would have probably taken on the human predators, but Shane was 2 years younger than Dimitri, and although his shift could come in at any time, it was unlikely to happen in the next 5 minutes. Besides, it was against pack law to shift in front of humans, much like it was against his pack's law to be gay, or apparently to look gay. Taking a deep breath, Shane adjusted his weight on his feet, and then, without warning, took off running again, his plan simply to get past Dimitri and hopefully to safety. Shane was a fast runner, one of the fastest in the pack, but Dimitri had quick reflexes on his side, and before he even had a chance to get away, Dimitri had grabbed him, snagging him around the waist with one strong arm and pulling him towards his chest. Shane cringed and raised his arms over his head in the hopes of forestalling the inevitable blow. The blow never came. Daring to peek at his attacker, Shane could see an absolutely stunned look on Dimitri's face. It was like he was seeing Shane for the first time. Then, without warning, Dimitri pushed his face into Shane's neck and sniffed him, really sniffed him. Shane thought he imagined a little groan escaped Dimitri's mouth, although it was more likely to be a growl. But before he could process what was happening, Shane heard the catcalling from Dimitri's friend. "What are you trying to do, Dee? Trying to snog the faggot? Gonna give him a hickey?" Shane felt Dimitri push him away with a snarl, and he landed on a heap on the ground. "Of course not. I'm more inclined to rip his throat out with my teeth," Shane heard Dimitri say. "But I can't be bothered with this shit. Don't want to get blood on my jacket. Come on, let's get a beer." And with that, Dimitri walked away, gathering his friends as they left Shane alone in the alley. What the fuck had just happened? Had Dimitri Polst just saved him from a beating? Why on earth would he do that? Dimitri had been Shane's worst enemy since Shane started kindergarten. It seemed wherever Shane went, Dimitri and his inevitable gang of friends were always there, calling him a name, stealing his lunch money, making him cry, stuffing him in lockers, throwing his shoes in the dumpster. As Shane got older, the threats became more physically violent, and many times Shane had gone home from school with a black eye and worse. While his mother fussed over him, his father refused to say anything to the Alpha about it. In his father's opinion, Shane just needed to toughen up and cut his hair. Shane lived for the day when he would go through his first shift, because the first thing he was going to do once he knew he could access his wolf form successfully was get the hell out of his pack and as far away from Dimitri Polst and the others like him as possible. And that is what he did. When Shane was 17, he went through his first shift and became a full wolf. He went home, packed his bag, told his mum and dad he was gay, and walked out of the house as the shouting started. He had never been back. Chapter 1. So, did you have a hot date last night? Shane heard his very pregnant partner's whispered comment even as he tried to slip unobtrusively into his seat. The regular Monday morning meeting had already started, and Shane was more than 5 minutes late. He'd been out in the park the night before, having a well-needed run in his wolf form. There had been hares and rabbits, and, well, time had gotten away from him, and he hadn't crawled home until well after 3 in the morning. The last place Shane wanted to be was at an early morning meeting, listening to his lieutenant drone on about statistics and the need for the police to present a caring face to the public. Handing a large cup of hot chocolate to his partner, Ruby, Shane waggled his eyebrows at her but didn't say anything. He was too busy trying to inhale his own jumbo cup of coffee. That was the only thing he needed. Well, that and a couple of cigarettes. But as smoking had been banned in the precinct building for some time now, that would have to wait until after the meeting was finished. Leaning back in his chair, Shane half closed his eyes and let the drone of his lieutenant's voice wash over him. Really, the man never said anything new, and Shane was sure the only reason for those mandatory meetings was so the lieutenant could hear the sound of his own voice. He was almost asleep when he heard a loud, brusque voice yell out, "Listen up, people." Shit. When had Captain Reynolds come into the investigations room? The captain never attended these meetings. Shane sat up a bit straighter in his chair and took a long another sip of his coffee. He looked up over his cup to see what the captain was doing, and stared straight into the eyes of Dimitri Polst. Hell no. What was that man doing here? Vaguely, Shane heard the captain introduce Dimitri as a new detective to the precinct, starting immediately. He registered that the captain was waffling on about making the man feel welcome and all of that shit, but his mind couldn't get past the fact that after 8 years, Dimitri Polst was not only in his fucking precinct, but he was coming there to work. Shane was just gobsmacked. "Hey, you look like you've seen a ghost." Ruby smacked his arm, and Shane looked around, noting the meeting was over. "Yeah, it's nothing," Shane mumbled. "Late night last night and all that, you know." "I don't know, pretty boy. I'm pregnant, haven't you noticed, and haven't done anything exciting for months. So tell me, did you have a date?" Shane laughed and shook his head. Ruby Pearl was a fine detective and a really good partner. She was a short little thing, and perps often underestimated her fighting ability, her smart mouth and quick wit. Before she had gotten pregnant, she could almost outrun Shane, and that was saying something. Shane was going to miss her when she went on leave at the end of the week. "You know I don't date, Rubes. I just fuck. Often," he commented wryly, opening his drawer and pulling out his case files. They currently had 3 open homicides, and Shane wanted to go over the material to see if he could come up with any more leads. All 3 of the victims were young gay men who'd all been out clubbing when they'd apparently been intercepted on their way home, strangled and their faces slashed by some kind of a knife. Despite the amount of carnage on the bodies, so far not one drop of evidence pointing to a possible killer had been found. And while Shane wanted the cases brought together as a possible serial killer, so far the department, or rather his lieutenant, had been reluctant to do it. But as Shane went over his files again, he realised what he actually wanted to do was anything he could in the hopes that he could forget that Dimitri fucking Polst was going to be working in his department. Come on, pretty boy, Ruby coaxed. You can tell me you know I live vicariously through your exploits. I can't think why, Shane replied as he started reading. You know darn well I'm gay. It's not as though you'd be doing any of the things I like to do anyway. I'm not doing much of anything, Ruby said with a pout in her voice. The phone behind her rang and she picked it up. Seconds later she put the phone down and tapped on Shane's arm. Come on, pretty boy, the boss wants to see us. Who? The lieutenant? Nope. You'd better put your jacket on, because it's the captain that wants to see us both right away. What have you done this time, Shane? I haven't done anything, Shane insisted, even as he ran his mind over his recent busts. Because his senses were that much sharper than humans, Shane could usually scent out more in a scene than humans could normally. Unfortunately, that also meant that there were occasions when Shane hadn't waited for backup, or he'd taken what some might consider unacceptable risks when collaring a perp. Those occasions had seen Shane and Ruby pulled up in front of the captain for a lecture on teamwork and acting in a responsible manner. Shane knew it was only because of his exemplary arrest record that he hadn't been fired before today, although he had been suspended on full pay a few times. He always made sure that the captain knew that Ruby wasn't responsible for his actions, but as his partner, she still had to suffer through any lecture they might get. Following his partner out through the investigations unit and down the corridor to the captain's office, Shane was certain there wasn't anything he had done lately to cause his boss to have another go at him. Maybe the captain wanted an update on the 3 open cases he and Ruby had. But no, that couldn't be it either. All updates had to go through the lieutenant first. That was why no one had recognised the fact that there was a serial killer on the loose. But as Shane and Ruby went into the captain's office, Shane was surprised to see the lieutenant was in the office as well. That was unusual. Shane turned to close the door behind him, and all of a sudden his senses were bombarded by the most amazing smell. Jasmine, rain on a summer day, a hint of citrus, and the underlying throb of wood. Forcing himself not to groan out loud, even as his cock rose and throbbed in his pants, and he was hit with the overwhelming urge to just find the source of that scent and wallow in it. Shane resisted banging his head on the door he was closing, and instead turned to face the others in the room. Captain Reynolds, the lieutenant, Ruby, of course, and Dimitri Polst. For a moment, all Shane could do was stand there, staring at the man who'd been the source of so much of the bullying that Shane endured growing up. Dimitri hadn't changed much since Shane had met him in the alley all those years ago. He still had dark hair, now cut short enough at the back to conform to police policies, but long enough on top for Shane to fist it if he ever got to fuck the delicious man's mouth. A man who could well be the central character in Shane's wet dreams from now on, with his height, well-formed chest and shoulders, trim waist, long legs, and an edible arse. Dimitri, who had the face of an angel with his dark eyes, straight nose, sinfully full lips, and a scent that Shane knew was going to drive him to hell every single day. Dimitri, the straight man, who should be his fucking mate. Oh, hell no. And as Shane looked into those deep chocolate eyes, he could see the amusement in the man's face. The sneaky wolf already knew. He knew that Shane was his mate, and he obviously thought the whole situation was hilarious. Well, Shane didn't think it was funny at all. He was so angry he could spit. What the hell was the man doing there? And how in the hell did a straight homophobe become his mate? Were the fates having an off day or something? Shane didn't have time to consider these questions, although he would as soon as he got some time to himself. But he noticed the captain and Ruby looking at him with concerned expressions on their faces. Shane drew on the years of experience he had of keeping his feelings to himself and said, "You wanted to see us, Captain?" Yes, West, I want you to meet your new partner. Polst here will be taking over from Ruby at the end of the week, and I thought it would be a good idea for the three of you to work together this week so Polst is up to speed with your cases and how we do things here before he starts his job officially on Friday. The captain looked as professional and calm as ever. The man had no idea he'd just officially thrown Shane's life into a living hell. Refusing to look at Dimitri's smug face, Shane concentrated on Captain Reynolds. Respectfully, sir, I thought we had agreed that the department couldn't afford to replace Ruby while she was on leave, and that I would be working my cases solo from now on. I have no problem doing that, as I explained at the time. I totally understand the department's need to make budget cuts. Shane added that last bit because he knew that would appeal to the lieutenant who so far hadn't said a word. That same lieutenant who was now looking more than a little uncomfortable. I understand what you're saying, West, and I appreciate your concern about the department's budget, he said curtly. The lieutenant was one of the few men in the investigations unit who blatantly didn't approve of Shane's sexual orientation, and he made his distaste for Shane abundantly clear. The feeling was mutual. However, the lieutenant went on, I have been informed that taking Pulse here into the department will be a positive move given his skills, and as he has specifically requested a transfer here, we would be foolish not to take him up on his offer. In other words, Dimitri was prepared to work cheap, but Shane's head was reeling. What skills? Since when was Dimitri even a detective? And why the hell did he request a transfer to the very station where Shane was established himself? Totally unsure about what was going on, Shane decided the best defence was a good offence, and he decided to fight with the only weapon he knew would put Dimitri off, the gay card. There was absolutely no fucking way he wanted to work with Dimitri, and once Dimitri was aware he was out at work, then Dimitri wouldn't want to work with him either. Sirs, Shane included the captain and the lieutenant in his sweeping gaze, although he steadfastly refused to acknowledge Dimitri. You are well aware of my sexual orientation and the fact that many of the cases I work on and the informants I deal with are mostly related to the gay community. I remember Pulse from school, and I think it would be unfair to put a man like him, with the skills you tell me he has, in a situation he might find difficult or unpleasant to handle. Ruby here, Shane nodded to his partner, who'd been looking at him like he'd grown 3 heads in the last 5 minutes, has never had a problem working with me, the cases we deal with, or the informants and places we go to chase leads. I doubt I would be able to have the same sort of working relationship with a man like Pulse, given his conservative views. Captain Reynolds glared at Shane. There is nothing in this man's resume to suggest that he has a problem with homosexuals. I am sure, regardless of his personal viewpoint on the subject, that Pulse is capable of conducting himself in a professional manner regardless of the environment. Isn't that right, Pulse? Both the captain and Shane turned to look at Dimitri, who still had that smirk on his face. I have to confess I don't have a lot of experience in that type of lifestyle choice, Captain, Dimitri said in that deep, sexy drawl. We don't have many gay people, in Jacob's Lake. However, I am confident that I can work with West here without any problems. I'm sure he can show me the ropes. When the fuck did that man's voice get so deep and downright sexy? All Shane could ever remember about Dimitri's voice in the past had been his snarling and the hate that poured off his delectable tongue. Damn it, Shane thought his cock would just explode and he needed to get out of the office and away from Dimitri fucking Post as quickly as possible. It was that need that made Shane swallow his pride and accept the inevitable. There was no way he was going to point out what a homophobic bully Dimitri had been in the past, because doing that would mean to admit his own past weaknesses. My apologies, Captain, Polst. I had no right to judge a person without assessing their experience in an environment in person. Is that all now, Captain? Shane spoke directly to Reynolds. Only if it is, I do have some leads I need to follow up. I'm sure Pulse won't mind if Ruby shows him our case files and gets them set up on the computer. I can fill in both Ruby and Pulse on any information I get later today. Captain Reynolds looked at Shane with that knowing bloody stare of his that always made Shane feel about 10 inches tall. It was that look that suggested Reynolds knew every single thing that was going on in Shane's head, and it took all of Shane's willpower not to flinch. Reynolds knew that Shane had never played the gay card in the office before. Sure, everyone knew of his sexual orientation, but Shane never spoke about it, never complained that most of the cases he dealt with were gay-related, and never did he bring it up as a means to try and get out of something that was essentially a direct order from his boss. Shane had a sinking suspicion he was going to be called into the captain's office again before the week was over. But for now, Reynolds simply nodded his head. Shane leaned down close to Ruby's ear and said, "I'll call you for your lunch order, all right?" Ruby looked confused, but she said, "Yeah, sure, see you at lunch." Shane nodded curtly at Pulse and then fled the office. He grabbed his keys from his desk along with his notepad. He always preferred to write things down rather than record them on any of the plethora of electronic devices available, and headed out. He needed fresh air in his lungs, and fast, if he ever had a hope in hell of getting his cop under control. Back in the office, Captain Reynolds looked at Dimitri. "Is Wes going to have a problem with you, Pulse? Only I have to tell you, he is one of the best detectives, one of our best detectives, and he does have innumerable contacts in the gay community that have been invaluable to our office." "No, sir, no problem at all," Dimitri said firmly. "I'm sure West and I will get along just fine." Of course, at the moment, the captain had no idea of just how fine the two of them would be getting along, but Dimitri hadn't left his home, his pack, and his job for nothing. He was going to get Shane in his bed and in his life if it was the last thing he did. Of course, at the moment, he didn't have a clue what he'd do with him once he got him in there, but hey, that's what the internet was for. And if there was one thing Dimitri was really good at, it was doing research. So he's plastered a smile on his face and decided that for now he would make an ally out of Ruby, his erstwhile mate's partner. He had waited 8 years to claim his mate. He could wait a little longer. And that is the end of Chapter 1. The link for the book from Amazon is down in the description below, and I hope you enjoyed it. In the meantime, hug the ones you love and stay safe, my friends. Till the next video, bye.